Subscribe to LearnCab and hit the bell icon to get notified.
So friends, next there are a few minor changes in the return filing chapter. There's an amendment in section 44. Now friends, under section 44, an annual return has to be filed. The due date for filing an annual return happens to be 31st of December following the end of the financial year. Say for example, for financial year 2019-20, the due date for filing annual return GSTR 9 for financial year 19-20 happens to be 31st of December 2020. Now friends, if at all the government wants to extend this due date, there is no provision under section 44 to extend the due dates. Friends, for the returns which are filed under section 39, say for example you have GSTR 3B which you are going to file under section 39. Now friends, for the returns which are being filed under section 39, there is already a provision which is there under section 39 where the commissioner can notify the extension of due dates. But there was no such provision under section 44 which enabled the government to extend the due dates for filing an annual return. So whatever extensions had been given in the past for financial year 17-18, for financial year 18-19, for annual returns, all those extensions are because of an order which was issued under section 172. There was no specific provision under section 44 where the due dates could have been just extended by issuing a notification. It had to come via an order. So now friends, section 44 is amended to that effect, wherein section 44 itself has got the powers where a commissioner could notify the extension of due dates of filing an annual return. So the commissioner may, on the recommendations of GST Council, extend the time limit for a class of registered persons. So friends, it is nothing technical. Earlier the government used to use section 172, pass an order, and then the annual returns due dates were being extended. Now an order is not required. A notification by the commissioner would be sufficient to extend the due dates of annual return. The next one is as regards as a composition taxable person is concerned. Friends, a composition taxable person pays his taxes quarterly, CMP 08. He files his GSTR 4 annually. Now friends, both these CMP 08 and GSTR 4, so far whatever he has been doing, it was because of a notification which was issued under section 148. For a class of registered person, the government could specify certain special mechanisms wherein the payment of taxes, it is not by a return, it is by a statement CMP 08. Filing of return GSTR 4, from quarterly it was converted into one return per annum. Now friends, this was happening through a special notification which was issued under section 148. Now these provisions have been brought into the section itself. So you have section 39 subsection 7 which tells you a composition taxable person has to pay the taxes quarterly, and read along with rule number 62 wherein it states that a composition taxable person has to file GSTR 4 once in a year. The next one is 35 subsection 5, audit of a registered person. So any registered person whose aggregate turnover, section 35 subsection 5 tells you any registered person whose aggregate turnover exceeds 2 crore rupees has to get its books of accounts audited and submit it along with the reconciliation statement. So friends, audited annual financial statements which is audited by a CA or CWA, and reconciliation statement in form GSTR 9C. Now friends, what is the scope of reconciliation statement? This reconciliation statement would reconcile the differences which are there between the values which are declared in the annual return and the values which are already there in the audited annual financial statements. So there could be differences for many reasons. The differences between GSTR 9 and the differences between audited annual financial statements, all these differences needs to be reconciled, and a reconciliation statement needs to be filed in GSTR 9C. So much we are already aware. Now friends, what is the amendment which has come? And friends, before we discuss this amendment, the Department of Central Government, State Government, Local Authority whose books of accounts is already audited by Comptroller and Auditor General of India, or if it is audited in case of a local authority, it is audited by an auditor who is appointed by the local authority under the respective laws. These persons need not file GSTR 9C. Reconciliation statement was exempted from them. So far, there is no change. Now the changes, there is one more person who has been added to the list who need not file his reconciliation statement in GSTR 9C. So friends, it tells you the foreign airline companies. According to the provisions of the Companies Act, a foreign airline company with respect to its operations in India, it need not prepare a profit and loss account and balance sheet. So now friends, please understand, when a profit and loss account and balance sheet is not required to be prepared in accordance with the Companies Act, when a profit and loss account and balance sheet is not required to be prepared in the accordance with the provisions of the Companies Act, how do we prepare a reconciliation statement? How can an auditor prepare a reconciliation statement? Because reconciliation is a difference. You have to resolve the difference between the annual return and audited annual financial statements. So now friends, when there is no profit and loss account balance sheet, there are no financial statements which are present. So there is no possibility of preparing a reconciliation statement. So therefore friends, these companies who are relaxed under the Companies Act that they need not prepare profit and loss account and balance sheet, a parallel relaxation is also given under the GST law, wherein they need not give or they need not furnish the reconciliation statement. However, in accordance with the Companies Act, they are mandated to submit a statement of receipts and payments. According to the Companies Act, they need not prepare a P&L balance sheet. However, with respect to its Indian operations, they are mandated to prepare a statement of receipts and payments, and that needs to be certified. That needs to be authenticated by a practicing CA in India. So now friends, parallelly, the similar exemption is there in GST as well. As regards this reconciliation statement is concerned, since there is no profit and loss account balance sheet which is being prepared, so therefore naturally reconciliation statement cannot be prepared. Hence, these foreign airline companies are exempted from submitting GSTR 9C or by preparing GSTR 9C. However, they have to furnish, with respect to its Indian operations, they have to furnish statement of receipts and payments. So friends, foreign airline companies which are covered under section 381 subsection 1 of the Companies Act, they are not required to file GSTR 9C provided, it is conditional exemption, provided that statement of receipts and payments for the financial year in respect of its Indian operations authenticated by a practicing CA in India is submitted for each GSTIN. So foreign airline company, the number of GSTINs it is having in India, so many statements of receipts and payments it needs to be furnished. It has to be submitted for each GSTN, and now the most important point comes by 30th September of the succeeding financial year. So friends, the due date is not 31st of December. This receipts and payments statement needs to be submitted by 30th of September of the succeeding financial year. The next amendment is in the area of exemption. Friends, there is only one entry which has been amended over here, and that entry is with regard to long-term lease of land. Long-term lease of land for 30 years or more. Now friends, let's discuss the background of this. Now friends, as regards as long-term lease of land is concerned, as regards as GST is there, it is a supply of service. Long-term lease of land, it is a supply of service according to Schedule 2. And friends, in few of the states for long-term lease of land, even stamp duty gets attracted. In few of the states, let's say in the state of Punjab, for long-term lease of land for 30 years and above, even stamp duty gets attracted. Now friends, please understand that just because stamp duty is getting attracted, it doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. There is a levy of GST as well, and according to the respective state stamp duty laws, there is a levy of stamp duty as well. So now friends, this we have already seen that just because you are paying stamp duty, it doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. It doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. There was a circular which stated that on the pagadi amount which is being received, that is the sale of tenancy rights. On this pagadi amount what is being received, even though stamp duty is being paid in the state of Maharashtra, still there is a levy of GST. So the thing which you are trying to discuss is, just because you are paying stamp duty doesn't mean that GST cannot be levied. Now coming back to this discussion, in case of long-term lease of land, according to GST law, it is a supply of service. There is a levy of GST. Now also it attracts stamp duty according to the relevant state stamp duty laws. So friends, there was a discussion in GST Council that this attracts two taxes. So let us exempt GST. Let us exempt GST on long-term lease of land wherever stamp duty is getting attracted. There is a levy, but the lawmakers, the council members just wanted, there was a proposal, there was a discussion that let us just exempt GST since stamp duty is also getting attracted on this transaction. However, a consensus was not achieved. There was a proposal in the council, all of the council members did not agree for it, and at the end what the council decided was, let us give an exemption, but to start with, let us have a very narrow exemption. Let us exempt long-term lease of land, but not by all the lessors. Only government-controlled entities. If they are leasing out long-term They are leasing out their land for a long term, and that too if they are leasing out industrial plots. So industrial plots, and the lessor should be a government controlled entity. If they are leasing it out, then let us exempt it. Let us start with a very narrow exemption. As and when time passes on, let us relax this exemption, let us broaden this exemption, and eventually we will try and cover even other entities who are leasing out this land for any purpose. To start with, let us start with government controlled entities for industrial plots. So with that attempt, they gave an exemption stating that if industrial plots are being leased out by government controlled entities, that means wherever the share of the government in those entities, let it be central government, state government, union territory, the share of the government in those entities wherever it is 50% and above. So that means if those entities are the lessors and if they are giving out industrial plots, then the exemption would apply. Other than those persons, if any other person is leasing it out, or if they are leasing it out, that is these government controlled entities is leasing it out, but it is not an industrial plot, then the exemption would not apply, and that would attract GST also and stamp duty also. So this was the broad agenda with which we started, and as they promised that eventually let us relax this exemption, let us broaden the scope of this exemption. So by an amendment which we are going to discuss now, they have broadened the scope of the exemption. And how have they broadened it? They say that now if the lessor happens to be an entity, the lessor of these industrial plots, if they happen to be an entity wherein the government has a stake of 20% or above, and above, even then the exemption would apply. So friends, earlier it was 50%, now they say it is 20%. Naturally, the number of entities, the number of lessors would be more over here. Please understand, don't get confused by diluting the control. Earlier they told that an entity in which the government is having 50% stake, if that entity is leasing out an industrial plot, it would be exempted. Now they say that if there is an entity in which the government is having 20% or more stake, if this entity is leasing out industrial plots, it would be exempted. So now, since the control is diluted, there are more number of lessors who are there in this 20% bracket. There are more number of lessors, there are more number of entities which are there wherein the government has a stake of more than 20% and above. So friends, by this way, they have broadened the scope of exemption. Of course, with certain conditions, we are going to see them. So let's have a look at the entry. So long-term lease, that is 30 years or more, of industrial plots or plots for development of infrastructure for financial business. This remains the same, there is no change. By state government industrial development corporations, which means your SIDCO, or by any other entity which is having 20% or more ownership of government. Fine. So wherever there is an entity which the lessor should either be a SIDCO or the lessor should be an entity wherein the government has a stake of 20% or more. If they happen to be the lessor, and this lease should be given to an industrial unit. It should be given to an industrial unit or to the developers in any industrial or financial business area. So friends, the lessor is fixed, the duration of the lease is fixed, the lessee is fixed, and the nature of the plot is fixed. If all these four criteria are cumulatively satisfied, only then the exemption would hold good. And friends, the consideration which is going to be received for this long-term lease of land, it should be on one-time upfront payment called as either premium, salami, cost price, developmental charges, etc. Here also there is a no change, friends. The only change which is there is they have tried to include more number of lessors who can enjoy this exemption. Earlier it was government controlled entities, and there it control meant that 50% and above. Now they say that if the lessor happens to be an entity where the stake of the government is even 20% or above, so more number of entities would get covered over here. So therefore more number of lessors would enjoy this exemption. However, there are conditions. So now friends, there is an explanation before we go to the conditions. The explanation tells you, for the purpose of this exemption, the government shall have 20% or more ownership in the entity, either directly or through an entity which is wholly owned by the government. So either directly 20% or through an entity wholly owned by the government, even if that is having 20% or above, still the lessor would be eligible for grant of exemption. Now friends, there are certain conditions if one wants to enjoy these exemptions. The condition is, the leased plots shall be used for the purpose for which they are allotted. That is, industrial or financial activity in an industrial or financial business area. This purpose has to be maintained only if the plot is given for this specific purpose. The exemption can be enjoyed. Now friends, who has to enforce this? The state government concerned shall monitor and enforce the above condition. So the respective state government is responsible to see that whether this plot for which it has, the purpose for which it has been let out, for which an exemption is claimed under GST, whether the plot is being used for the same purpose by the same person to whom it is being given. Now friends, there could be a scenario where, let's say an entity is there. There is an entity which is, and it is a specified entity, that is the government is having 20% or more of stake in it. Now that entity is giving out a land on long-term lease to an industrial unit. Now friends, here the conditions are satisfied. Exemption is claimed. Now friends, that again industrial unit which has taken this land on lease, if it is trying to change the purpose, that means it is not using it for industrial purpose, the exemption would not hold good. Another scenario, that lessee which is there, if it is subleasing the land to another lessee, and now friends, if that person who has taken the land on lease, so now friends, here there is a lessor, that is say CIDCO. There is a lessee which is an industrial unit, exemption available. Now here again this land is given on sublease. Now friends, as regards as the sublease is concerned, here if the purpose is changed, that means as regards as the sublease is concerned, in this sublease, if this land is no longer going to be used for the set purpose for which exemption was granted, the exemption would be lifted. So now friends, as regards as this exemption is concerned, here the exemption would be lifted. So wherever the condition, this notification condition further states you that whenever it is going to be subletted, the sublease agreement also should carry a clause that the land has to be used only for the specified purpose. If that is not being used for the specified purpose, exemption would be lifted. And friends, here the new point is, the very new point in this exemption notification is, the moment the exemption is lifted, all these three persons, the lessor, the lessee and the sublessee, would be jointly and severally liable. They would be jointly and severally liable to discharge the GST liability had this exemption not been there. So friends, here the agreement which is going to be entered between this lessee and this sublessee should also carry a point that this land is going to be used only for the specified purposes, otherwise even the sublessee would be liable. Friends, now this is the first time what we are seeing that under GST normally the person who is liable to pay taxes is generally the supplier. Let us ignore the reverse charge cases. Other than that, the person who is liable to pay taxes to the government is the supplier. The supplier can collect it from the recipient and pay, and even if he is not collecting it from the recipient and paying, ultimately it is the supplier who is going to be responsible. The government will not or cannot collect the taxes from the recipient. Now friends, this is the first case where other than reverse charge, therefore this is not a reverse charge case. For cases other than reverse charge, the supplier and the recipient are going to be jointly liable if the conditions are not met with. So let's have a look. In case of any violation or subsequent change of land use due to any reason whatsoever, the original lessor, the original lessee, as well as any subsequent lessee or buyer or owner shall be jointly and severally liable to pay such amount of GST as would have been payable but for the exemption which was there. The lease agreement entered into by the original lessor with the original lessee or subsequent lessee or sublessee, as well as any subsequent lease or sale agreements for the lease or sale of such plots to subsequent lessees or buyers or owners shall incorporate in the terms and conditions the fact that GST was exempted on long-term lease of the plots by the original lessor to the original lessee, subject to the above condition being followed, and that the parties to the said agreements undertake to comply with the same. So even if the sublessee is violating the condition, the GST exemption would be lifted and all these parties in this chain would be jointly and severally liable. The next change in the area of e-way bill. Now friends, as regards as e-way bill amendment is concerned, this amendment has been introduced with the objective of increasing the compliance. That is your return filing. So friends, there are many registered persons who do not file their returns on time. So the government, in order to increase the compliance rate of those registered persons, the government has said that if there is any registered person who has defaulted, the return filing for a set period. What is that set period? We'll be discussing that. If there's a registered person who has defaulted the return filing for the set period, he would not be allowed to generate an e-way bill. So therefore, if he wants to generate an e-way bill, after having defaulted the return filing for a set period, first he has to file his returns and only then he'll be in a position to generate his e-way bill. Now what would happen by this? Friends, as regards as e-way bill is concerned, wherever e-way bill is required and if a registered person is not able to generate an e-way bill, he will not be able to deliver the goods to his customers. So his business would take a direct hit. Why would he not be able to deliver the goods to his customers? If he is sending the goods without the cover of an e-way bill, his vehicle might be intercepted and he might be asked to pay taxes and penalties. So now friends, with this objective, this provision, this amendment has been brought in that a registered person who is defaulting the return filing for a set period, he would not be able to generate an e-way bill. Now friends, Rule 138E, this is the rule which has been come in. Now friends, let's have a look at this. It would not be so simple how the provision what we have discussed on a very bird's eye view, on a broader sense. Let's have a look into the wordings of this rule. Notwithstanding anything contained in sub-rule 1 of Rule 138. So Rule 138 sub-rule 1 tells you that a registered person who is causing movement of goods for an amount greater than threshold, he is required to furnish information in Part A of e-way bill 01. Now this 138E is notwithstanding anything which is containing in 138 sub-rule 1. That means whatever is written over there, a registered person should mandatorily generate an e-way bill. Whatever is written over there, forget it. Read this rule now. It tells you, not overriding whatever was written in 138 sub-rule 1, no person including a consignor, consignee, transporter, eco or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish the information in Part A of Form GST EWV 01 in respect of a registered person, whether as a supplier or a recipient who has defaulted the return filing for this said period. Now friends, what is the said period? We'll be discussing that. But before that, let us have a careful analysis at the first part of this rule. It tells you that no person including a consignor, consignee, transporter, eco or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish information in Part A of e-way bill 01 in respect of a registered person, whether as a supplier or a recipient who is a return filing defaulter. Now friends, to understand this, let's take a matrix. Now let's say there is a consignor A. Who wants to deliver the goods to consignee B. There's a consignor A who wants to deliver the goods to a consignee B. The defaulter is A. That means A has not furnished the returns for the set period. He is a return filing defaulter. A wants to generate an e-way bill. Can A do so? Is the question. Now friends, I repeat the statement again. Please carefully concentrate. Consignor is A. Consignee is B. Return filing defaulter is A. E-way bill, A wants to generate it. Can he generate it? The answer is simple, no. He cannot generate an e-way bill. Agreed? So therefore, e-way bill cannot be generated. Once he makes the return filing default good, of course he can generate it. Now friends, what A thinks is, now I am a return filing defaulter. I want to deliver the goods to my consignee. I am not in a position to generate an e-way bill. Never mind. Let me ask my consignee to generate an e-way bill. Let me say that the consignee is the registered person who is causing movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. Anyhow, the goods have to go to the destination. Let it be generated by the consignor or by the consignee. The consignee could be a registered person who is causing the movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. So I will ask my consignee to generate an inward e-way bill. Friends, please understand, Rule 138 doesn't tell you that the consignor should generate an e-way bill. Rule 138 simply tells you registered person who is causing the movement of goods has to generate an e-way bill. Now let me term this contract in such a way that the consignee is a registered person who is causing the movement of goods. Let him generate an e-way bill. I am not able to generate. Now friends, take in scenario number 2, the consignor is A, the consignee is B, the defaulter is A. Same situation, nothing is changed. But the change is now B wants to generate an e-way bill. The consignee will be generating an inward e-way bill. Can B do so? Let's have a look at the wordings, friends. Notwithstanding anything contained in subrule 1 of 138, no person, now let us leave consignor, including a consignee. No person, including a consignee, notwithstanding anything contained in subrule 1 of rule 138, no person, including a consignee, shall be allowed to furnish the information in part A of GST EWB 01 in respect of a registered person as a supplier who is a defaulter. Now friends, here this person Mr. B, who is not a defaulter, he wants to generate an e-way bill and furnish information in part A of e-way bill 01 in respect of a registered person who is a defaulter as a supplier. He also cannot generate an e-way bill. So now friends, the scenario number 2, e-way bill cannot be generated. Here also e-way bill cannot be generated. So now friends, whether the defaulter is generating an e-way bill or the consignee who is not a defaulter is generating an e-way bill, both the provisions are covered over here. None of them can generate an e-way bill. Now friends, scenario number 3. Consignor is A, consignor is A, consignee is B. Consignor is A, consignee is B, defaulter is B. That means the recipient to whom the goods are going to go, he is a defaulter. He is a registered person who has not furnished his returns. Please understand, I want to send the goods to you. I am not a defaulter. I am a regular compliant assessee. I want to deliver these goods to you. You are a registered person and you have not filed your GST returns. Now friends, when I want to deliver these goods to a recipient, to a consignee who is a defaulter, can I generate an e-way bill? Consignor is A, consignee is B, defaulter is B. E-way bill to be generated by A, is it possible? The answer is no, that is also not possible. Please have a look at the wordings. The wordings tells you, notwithstanding anything contained in 138 subrule 1, no person including a consignor. Now we are talking about the consignor generating an e-way bill. No person including a consignor shall be allowed to furnish the information in part A in respect of a registered person as a recipient. So now friends, here the registered person recipient is a defaulter, then also e-way bill cannot be generated. So now friends, here also e-way bill cannot be generated. Please understand, the person, the supplier is not a defaulter. Just because the recipient is a defaulter, even the supplier cannot generate an e-way bill. Scenario number 4. Consignor is A, consignee is B, defaulter is B. Can B generate an e-way bill? Of course, the answer is no. B also here cannot generate an e-way bill. He himself is the defaulter. Now friends, having fed up of all of these things, what do they plan? They say the consignor is A, the consignee is B. A wants to send the goods to B. The defaulter, let it be any person. Let A be the defaulter or let B be the defaulter. The consignor and consignee ask the transporter to generate an e-way bill. See, I cannot generate, you cannot generate. Let us ask the transporter to generate. Can the transporter generate an e-way bill? Yes. If the transporter is authorized by the consignor or the consignee, the registered person who is causing movement of goods, he can very well generate an e-way bill. They ask the transporter to generate an e-way bill. Now, can e-way bill be generated by the transporter? Please have a look at the wordings again. Notwithstanding anything contained in 138 subrule 1, no person including a transporter, e-commerce operator or a courier agency shall be allowed to furnish information in part A in respect of a registered person either as a supplier or as the recipient. So friends, here transporter also cannot generate an e-way bill. So friends, in short, the summary of the entire discussion what we have had, that whosever information you are punching in part A, you furnish the information of the consignor, you furnish the information of the consignee. Whoever is causing the movement of goods, we are not bothered. The consignor and the consignee, the supplier and the recipient, if either of them is a defaulter, neither the consignor, nor the consignee, nor the transporter, nor the e-commerce operator, nor the courier agency would be in a position to generate an e-way bill because part A itself cannot be furnished. Now friend, what is the default period? Here the default period we go and read. Whether as a supplier or a recipient who, being a person paying tax under section 10, has not furnished the statement in GST CMP 08 for 2 consecutive quarters. That means if he is a composition taxable person and he has not furnished CMP 08 for 2 consecutive quarters, and as we all know, CMP 08 is a statement which is required for payment of taxes by a composition taxable person. It is not a return. Please understand, it is not a return, it is a statement through which a composition taxable person pays taxes quarterly. If that is not furnished for 2 consecutive quarters, then e-way bill cannot be generated. Being a person other than a person specified in clause A, that means other than a composition taxable person, the regular person, he has not furnished the returns. He has not furnished the returns for a consecutive period of 2 months. That means if there's a person, a regular person, if he has not furnished GSTR 3B consecutively for 2 months, e-way bill cannot be generated. Friends, does this point cover GSTR 1? The answer is no, because GSTR 1 is a statement of outward supplies. It is details of outward supplies and it is not a return. Here what they are talking about is return. But please don't cherish. Read the next point. It tells you, being a person other than a person specified in clause A, that is other than your composition taxable person, has not furnished statement of outward supplies for any 2 months or quarters as the case may be. So friends, as we all know, GSTR 1, it could be filed monthly, and by certain selected registered persons, it could be filed quarterly as well. So if they have not filed it for 2 months or 2 quarters, e-way bill cannot be generated. Friends, the point which needs to be observed over here is, as regards as the first part is concerned, it tells you for 2 consecutive quarters CMP 08 if it is not being filed. The next one, being a person other than the person of composition taxable person, he has not furnished returns for 2 consecutive periods. But friends, as regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, the word consecutive is missing. The word consecutive is missing. So here it tells you that if he has not furnished the statement of outward supplies for any 2 months or any 2 quarters, so it need not be consecutively. Let's suppose you did not file for the month of April. You filed it for the month of May. Does the portal allow you? The answer is yes. As regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, it allows you. But for GSTR 3B, it doesn't allow you. 3B, without filing the returns for the preceding tax periods, you cannot file the returns for the current tax periods, but it is not so for GSTR 1. GSTR 1, if you have not filed the returns for the month of April, still you can go ahead and file the returns, file the GSTR 1 for the month of June. So now friends, here as regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, even if you have not filed for 2 months, it is not consecutive months, 2 months or 2 quarters. Let's say you did not file for the month of April. You filed it for the month of May. Again, you did not file it for the month of June. Now for 2 periods, GSTR 1 is remaining unfiled. You will not be in a position to generate an e-way bill. So friends, as regards as 3B and CMP 08 is concerned, it is 2 consecutive periods. As regards as GSTR 1 is concerned, it is any 2 periods. Now friends, when this blockage would be lifted, the moment you comply this, the moment you say that I have filed the returns. So whenever, even if your returns are remaining unfiled, for less than these 2 consecutive periods or less than 2 periods, you will be in a position to file the returns. Let's suppose for 2 consecutive periods, I did not file my GSTR 3B. And today, since I am not in a position to generate an e-way bill, I file my GSTR 3B for 1 month. Am I in a position to generate an e-way bill? The answer is yes. I file it today. From tomorrow, I will be in a position to generate an e-way bill because now my 2 consecutive returns are not pending. Now this blockage is being lifted automatically by the system itself once you file the returns, once you make your default good. But however friends, you might be in a financial crunch, you might be in a position, you might not be, you will be having shortage of funds, you are not in a position to pay your taxes and file the returns. So therefore, but still you want to deliver the goods, you want an e-way bill to be generated, there's an option which is given. You can go and make a manual request to the commissioner and he may permit you. He may permit you under special circumstances to generate an e-way bill even though your return filing defaulter. So now friends, this upliftment of blockage of e-way bill, you not being allowed to generate an e-way bill, one is automated if you make the default good. Second one, it is a manual request which needs to be made to the proper officer. So provided that the commissioner may, on receipt of an application from a registered person, inform GST EWB 05 on sufficient cause being shown and for the reasons to be recorded in writing by order, inform EWB 06, allow furnishing of the said information in part A subject to such conditions and restrictions as may be specified by him. So you have to electronically make an application, manually go and physically go and meet the officer, and then he would permit you to generate an e-way bill on certain special circumstances. Provided further that no order rejecting the request will be made without giving an opportunity of being heard. So that is what I said you have to make an application and go meet the officer. If he wants to reject it, he cannot reject it without meeting you. So principles of natural justice needs to be followed. Provided also that the permission granted or rejected by the Commissioner of State Tax shall be deemed to be granted or as the case may be rejected by the Commissioner. So friends, here also you have the cross empowerment provisions. If the state officer is allowing you, it is deemed that the central officer has also allowed you, and if the state officer is rejecting it, it is deemed that the central officer has also rejected it. The next change is with regard to corporate insolvency. Friends, there is a notification 11/2020 and there is a related circular to this notification. Now friends, before we understand the notification and the circular, let us have a brief discussion about the basics of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. So now friends, let's say there's a corporate, Satyam Limited. It is not able to pay its financial creditors, also it is not able to pay its operational creditors. The default is exceeding some threshold according to the IBC 2016. Now friends, what do you mean by financial creditors? Those persons who have advanced or who have given a loan to this company, they are financial creditors. Your other raw material suppliers, these are all operational creditors. Say for that matter, even the GST dues, they would stand operational creditors. The GST department is an operational creditor of this company. It is not a financial creditor. So friends, Satyam Limited, it is unable to discharge its liability towards financial creditors and operational creditors, and the default is exceeding a threshold as is prescribed in IBC 2016. Now friends, the financial creditors, they approach NCLT, your National Company Law Tribunal, stating that this company or the management of this company is either not paying or it is not willing to pay. Either it is not capable of paying or it is not willing to pay its dues. So NCLT friends, it would appoint an interim resolution professional. It would appoint an interim resolution professional to find out whether the claims which are made by the financial creditors and operational creditors are correct. And if it is found to be correct, it would initiate a resolution process. And the first step would be, it would grant a moratorium period. During this moratorium period, neither the financial creditors nor the operational creditors, they cannot initiate any legal proceedings against Satyam Limited. They cannot initiate any legal proceedings against this corporate debtor. This company in IBC, it is going to be called as corporate debtor. They are financial creditors, operational creditors. He is the corporate debtor. So now friends, during this moratorium period, neither the financial creditors nor the operational creditors, they can initiate any legal proceedings against the company. If it is already initiated, they cannot continue the legal proceedings against Satyam Limited. Now friends, what is the role of interim resolution professional? Interim resolution professional is going to give a resolution plan as to how this company can be made viable, how this company can be rescued. That is going to be the agenda of this interim resolution professional. Now friends, once the interim resolution professional has been appointed, he would set up a committee of creditors. Those creditors, these financial creditors, would be a part in this committee of creditors. Now friends, please understand, whose money is involved? It is the creditors' money who is being involved. Now friends, NCLT has appointed a person called as interim resolution professional to give a resolution plan. Now friends, since the financial creditors and these creditors' money is directly involved, they might want their own trusted person to act as a resolution professional. They would not want an IRP to act as a resolution professional. They might not even know him and to give a resolution plan. They might have their trust in some other qualified resolution professional. So therefore, this IRP would first appoint a committee of creditors. This committee of creditors would then appoint a resolution professional who is going to give the resolution plan. What is going to be the agenda? What is going to be the objective of this resolution professional? If the company is in a position to repay the dues, this company would be rescued. Otherwise, this company would be liquidated. So now friends, this committee of creditors would appoint the resolution professional. The interim resolution professional itself can be appointed as the final resolution professional, or another person could be appointed as a resolution professional. Now this resolution professional is going to give a resolution plan. In this resolution plan, he is going to ascertain whether this company is capable of repaying its dues. See friends, these financial creditors and operational creditors, these dues were not paid. Non-payment of these dues could be out of two reasons. One, the company is not capable. Two, it could be the company is capable, but the management, the board of directors do not want to pay the dues to these creditors. So now friends, during this moratorium period, a resolution professional is being appointed. This resolution professional is now going to run the company till a final resolution plan is given to the board and board passes an order. So friends, this period is called a CIRP. That is this period during which the moratorium period is there. During this period, the resolution professional is going to run the affairs of the company. The board of directors is going to lose its power. It cannot have the effective control in the management of the company during this CIRP. So now friends, the resolution plan would be given. If the company is capable of paying, it would give a plan as to how to pay it. If the company is not capable of paying, the plan is not viable, then this company would be liquidated, and whatever is being realized from the liquidated assets would be repaid to the financial creditors or operational creditors in the proportionate manner. So friends, this is all about the basics of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Now friends, as regards as GST dues is concerned, they also stand in operational creditors. They also stand in operational creditors. So friends, why we are discussing this is because now during this moratorium period, when the resolution plan is going to be devised by the resolution professional, during the moratorium period, neither the financial creditors nor the operational creditors, none of them, rather not any person will be in a position to initiate any legal proceedings, or if it is already initiated, they cannot continue the legal proceedings against this company during the moratorium period, that is until the NCLT is passing the order. So now friends, these are the few terms which we need to accustom to since it is a new topic to you. Let's have a brief look up at these terms once again. So the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016, we are going to call this as IBC. Now this, whatever we have discussed so far, is according to the provisions of IBC 2016. Corporate debtor. In our example, Satyam Limited is corporate debtor, that person who is unable to discharge the dues of financial creditors or operational creditors. Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, CIRP. Now friends, this is a process of finding out whether the company, the corporate debtor, is in a position to repay the dues, whether it is capable of repaying the dues, and if it is capable, a resolution plan would be given. Otherwise, the company would be liquidated. Friends, please understand, the objective of this process is not to liquidate the company. The first and foremost priority is to rescue the company, and if it is not in a position to rescue it, then the company would be liquidated. Corporate Insolvency Resolution Period. This is the period during which the resolution professional is in charge, is at the helm of the affairs of the company. During this period, there is a moratorium which is there in force. No legal proceedings can either be initiated, or if initiated, they cannot be continued against this company during this period. Interim Resolution Professional. It is that professional who is appointed by NCLT. This is the resolution professional. We can call him as a final resolution professional. He is the resolution professional who is appointed by the committee of creditors. Now, what is the objective or what is the mechanism? If the company, the corporate debtor is falling, but it is viable, then they would rescue. This process would rescue that debtor. If it is falling and not viable, then that corporate debtor would be liquidated. The advantage is it is a time-bound process to resolve the insolvency. Now friends, this is about the basics of IBC. Now let us focus into GST and the issues which arise in GST because of this IBC. Now friends, let's take a scenario where there is Satyam Limited. From 1st January 2020, from 1st of January 2020 till 30th of June 2020, this company is being run by its board of directors. Now, there are GST dues to the extent of 10 crore. This company is not in a position to discharge neither its financial creditors nor its operational creditors. Currently, we are concerned only about the GST dues because we are discussing with in relation to GST what impact does it have. So it is not in a position to discharge its GST dues to the extent of 10 crores. Also, it is not in a position to discharge its financial creditors. So friends, for this continuous period, its financial creditors were also not being paid. So some of the financial creditors approached NCLT to give a resolution plan to appoint an interim professional to remove these board of directors and make the resolution professional in charge as the administrative affairs of the company. So now friends, this NCLT first accepts the application, then grants a moratorium period up to 30th of September 2020. So up to 30th of September 2020, there is moratorium period. No person can either initiate or continue any legal proceedings against Satyam Limited. And during this period, friends, a resolution professional is being appointed. The board of directors lose its power and the power comes in the hand of resolution professional to run the company. And friends, according to IBC, this resolution professional is in charge, is responsible for meeting all the legal compliances. This point is very, very important, friends. During the period when resolution professional is in charge, let's say this resolution professional is appointed on 15th of July 2020. So on and from 15th of July 2020 till 30th September 2020, let's say during this period, this resolution professional is in charge to comply with all the legal requirements which are there, all the laws which are applicable to this Satyam. Now friends, during the period when he is running the business, when he is running the show, when he is trying to devise a resolution plan as to how to rescue this company, during this period, the company obviously it makes supplies. It is the business is not closed down. Only the management has changed. So the business continues and there are GST dues to the extent of 1 crore. There are GST dues to the extent of 1 crore during the time when the resolution professional is in charge of the affairs of the company. And now friends, according to IBC, this resolution professional is responsible for discharging this GST liability of 1 crore. Please understand this. During this period when resolution professional is in charge, he is the person who is responsible to discharge this GST dues of 1 crore. Now friends, this person wants to discharge the GST dues of rupees 1 crore, but he is facing certain issues. Now, what are the issues which is facing, friends? Now, friends, as regards as this company is concerned, it has already got undischarged GST dues to the extent of 10 crores at that point of time when the board of directors were in charge of the company. So already old dues to the extent of 10 crores is pending. Returns have not been filed for the period Jan 2020 till June 2020. Dues to the extent of 10 crores GST liability is not being discharged. Now friends, is this resolution professional in charge or responsible for discharging the old dues? The answer is no. He is responsible only on and from the date of his appointment. He is responsible to discharge only this rupees 1 crore. Now friends, he wants to comply with his legal requirements. He wants to comply with the provisions of IBC. He wants to pay the GST dues of 1 crore. But is he in a position to pay? The answer is no, because GST law doesn't allow him to pay. He wants to pay this 1 crore, but GST law doesn't allow him to pay 1 crore for the reason that according to the GST law, if the returns are not filed for preceding tax periods, the returns for the subsequent tax periods cannot be filed. So he wants to file the returns on and from the date on which he is being appointed. He wants to discharge the dues of 1 crore, but he is not in a position to do so because the GST returns for the period to Jan to June with GST liability of 10 crores, the returns have not been filed, the taxes are not being paid. So without filing the returns for Jan to June, he is not in a position to file the returns for subsequent periods. Now friends, without paying 10 crore rupees, the returns of past periods cannot be filed. So therefore, the past dues cannot be paid, the past returns cannot be filed. IRP or RP wants to file the returns for the current period or for the subsequent periods. The portal is not allowing him to do so, but Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is asking him to do so. Now friends, what is the solution? Now this issue, there are contradictory provisions, and please understand, IBC is overriding all other acts. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code overrides all the other provisions which are there in the Act. So strictly speaking, according to law, according to the interpretation of IBC and GST law put together, IBC would prevail and the portal should allow him. The portal should allow him to file the returns for the subsequent periods, even though the returns for the preceding tax periods has not been filed. So now friends, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the Ministry of Finance deliberated on this issue and they came out with a solution stating that let us ask this resolution professional to apply for a separate registration for Satyam Limited as a distinct person. Let us ask this resolution professional to apply for a separate registration for Satyam Limited. He is not going to apply for a separate registration in his own name. He is only going to be an authorized signatory. The registration would be in the name of Satyam Limited only, but as a distinct person. So now friends, this resolution professional is going to apply for a separate registration for Satyam Limited as a distinct person. So now friends, this Satyam Limited already has a GST number, let us call that as GST1. This resolution professional as an authorized signatory is going to apply a new registration as a distinct person for Satyam Limited, let's say GST2. So now friends, there are two GST numbers for Satyam Limited, let's say, and they are going to be in same PAN of course. Now they are only applying, please understand, resolution professional is not applying for registration in his own name. He is applying in the name of Satyam Limited, wherein he is an authorized signatory. He is applying the new registration as a distinct person. So now friends, why did he do so? He does so because when he applies for a new registration as a distinct person, for that distinct person's whatever GST liability of 1 crore is having, he can discharge it, because now this new GST number which is there, that will not have any preceding tax periods because this is a fresh registration. So now this way this problem is being solved. A new registration as a distinct person for Satyam Limited is being applied, and now the current dues wherein the resolution professional is in charge of the affairs of the company can be discharged even without discharging the old dues of 10 crore when the board of directors were in charge of the company. So friends, in the future discussion which is yet to come, what we are going to have, we are going to refer the old GST number as old Satyam, new GST number as new Satyam. Friends, please understand, the company remains the same, the PAN number remains the same. The period for which the board of directors were in charge, for that GST number, we will call it as old Satyam. And the period where the resolution professional is in charge, he is the authorized signatory, he applied for a new registration as a distinct person, that GST registration number, let's call it as new Satyam for the sake of convenience. Now friends, let's take few scenarios. So far what we have discussed, what was the issue which was there, how did this issue get resolved, what is the solution which is given. A new registration needs to be applied where resolution professional is going to be the authorized signatory. Now friends, when should this new registration be applied? This new registration should be applied according to notification 11/2020. This new registration has to be applied within a period of 30 days from the date on which this resolution professional is appointed. So friends, now let's discuss the cases again. Let's pose a few questions from GST and let us link it with IBC provisions. Now let's say friends, from 1st January 2020 till this resolution professional is appointed, let's say on 15th July 2020, till such time it was old Satyam which was there, that means it was managed by the board of directors. From 15th July 2020 onwards till the moratorium period of let's say 30th September 2020, resolution professional is going to be in charge. Now he is appointed on 15th of July, he has to apply for a new registration. He has to apply for a new registration within a period of 30 days, let's say on 13th of August 2020, he receives the new registration. He receives the registration in the capacity as an authorized signatory. A distinct entity is being formed in the GST portal. So now GST2 for new Satyam is being received. Now friends, during this period, that is during the period from 15th July till 13th of August, of course the business is not shut down. The business is being run and it is being run by the resolution professional. Now during this period there could be certain issues. Let us discuss those issues. Now friends, the issue is where to report the turnover during this period. That is the turnover from 15th of July 2020, from the date on which he is appointed, from the date on which he is running the business till 13th of August 2020, where should this turnover be reported? Now friends, please understand, during this period the business is not run. He has very well obtained registration within 30 days, but during this period from 15th July 20 to let's say 12th August 2020, there was no new GST number which this resolution professional was having. So therefore, he would have obviously made certain supplies during this period. He did not have a new GST number. During this period, he would have made certain supplies. Yes. Now, he receives the GST number, let's say on 13th of August 2020. Now friends, the new portal, that is the portal for New Satyam, the GST portal for New Satyam, that would allow to file the returns only from August tax period onwards, because the registration certificate was issued in the month of August. So now friends, as regards as the new GST number is concerned, the data in the new GST number can be punched only from August onwards. But what about the turnover which has happened during this period, which was made by the resolution professional? So friends, here they tell you that this turnover needs to be reported in the first return. This turnover needs to be reported in the first return of this new GST number. So friends, when this new GST number's August month return is going to be filed, in that August month's return, the turnover from 15th of July till 13th of August needs to be reported in the August month's return. So this is the concept of first return which has been introduced in this new GST number. The next question is, friends, now obviously during this period supplies have happened, that is from 15th of July till let's say 12th of August, supplies are happening. Supplies have been affected by this resolution professional. Now he should raise an invoice. The answer is yes. Does he have a new GST number? The answer is no, because new GST number he would receive it on 13th of August. During this period he has made certain supplies. Obviously in the invoice which is being issued, GST number of old Satyam would be punched, because he doesn't have a new GST number. New GST number, that is GST number of new Satyam, is going to come on 13th of August. From 15th July till 12th of August, supplies are made by this resolution professional. He has to issue an invoice. In the invoice, GST number of old Satyam would be mentioned. Agreed. So now friends, the recipients of this supply, they receive the goods. Yes. They receive the invoice. Yes. The invoice contains GST number of old Satyam. Yes. This turnover is going to be reported in the GST number of New Satyam. Please understand, this turnover as regards as reporting is concerned, this will go into the first return of the New Satyam. The answer is yes. So now New Satyam will file its GSTR 1. New Satyam would file its GSTR 1. It would go and auto-populate in GSTR 2A of the recipients of these supplies. The answer is yes. Now what is the issue? The issue is, friends, as regards as the recipients of these supplies are concerned, they are having a document which is containing the GST number of old Satyam, but in their GSTR 2A, the GST number of new Satyam is appearing. And there is a mismatch between the GST numbers which are appearing in the portal and the GST numbers which are printed on the invoice. I'm sure you're able to follow this practical difficulty. During this interim period, invoices were issued in GST number of old Satyam. In GSTR 2A, invoices are reflecting but with the GST number of new Satyam. So now friends, this causes a problem to the recipients. They are unable to comply with 36 sub rule 4, because 36 sub rule 4 tells you that only when invoices are auto-populated in GSTR 2A, the recipients would be in a position to take credit. It is auto-populating but with wrong details. So should relaxation be given during this interim period? The answer is yes. So friends, for the invoices which are raised by Satyam in the old GSTN number during this period alone, that is the date from which the resolution professional was appointed till the date on which this registration certificate is received, during this period alone, for the recipients, even if they are having the document containing old GST number and GSTR 2A containing new GST number, still it would be regarded as a sufficient compliance of Rule 36 sub Rule 4. The next question, what about the invoices which were raised upon Satyam in the old GST number? Friends, please understand, the earlier issue what we discussed was from the sales which were made by new Satyam. Now friends, during this period, new Satyam would also make certain purchases. The answer is yes. During this period, new Satyam would also make certain purchases. Now during this period, this new Satyam doesn't have a GST number, because GST number is received only on 13th of August. So all those suppliers who have made supplies to this resolution professional as in charge of this company during this period, in the invoice of their suppliers, GST number of old Satyam would be mentioned. The answer is yes. GST number of the old Satyam is going to be mentioned. Yes. Now friends, during this period, whatever supplies which are received by this new Satyam having the GST number on the invoice of old Satyam, having the GSTN of old Satyam on the invoice, can new Satyam take credit of it? I repeat, can new Satyam take credit of it? This is only a transitional issue which is being faced. I repeat the situation, friends. During this period, certain suppliers would have supplied to this company wherein Resolution Professional is in charge. Yes. They would have raised invoices on this new Satyam. Yes. Containing GST number of old Satyam, because so far Resolution Professional has not received the GST number of new Satyam. Yes. All those suppliers would file their GSTR 1. Yes. That will appear in GSTR 2F old Satyam because old GST number was punched in the invoice. Yes. Who wants to take the credit? New Satyam. In new Satyam's GSTR 2A, is anything getting auto-populated? No, because it is auto-populated in GSTR 2A of old Satyam. So now friends, can this new Satyam take credit even though it has not appeared in GSTR 2A of new Satyam? Since it is a transitional issue, the answer is yes. Invoice raised upon Satyam in old GST number also, the credit can be taken by new Satyam, but only for the invoices pertaining to this period, that is the period, the date from which the Resolution Professional is appointed till the date on which this GST RC is being received. Now friends, what about the old dues? This was as regards as transitional issue is concerned. Old dues. Recovery of old dues from Resolution Professional. Now can this 10 crores, please understand in the example what we discussed, during this period, old Satyam was responsible for 10 crores GST dues. Can this 10 crores be recovered from this Resolution Professional? The answer is no, because according to IBC, during the moratorium period, the GST dues are operational creditors. Any person cannot initiate any legal proceedings or cannot continue any legal proceedings during the moratorium period. So recovery proceedings are also legal proceedings. So therefore friends, these old dues cannot be recovered from the Resolution Professional. Also, Resolution Professional is in charge only of the dues only of those dues which arise during which he is in charge of the company. Those 10 crores dues which are there to the GST department, Resolution Professional was not in charge. So therefore, those old dues cannot be recovered. Notice cannot be issued to this Resolution Professional. Adjustment against cash ledger deposits. Now friends, let's say during this period, Resolution Professional wanted to deposit some amount in the cash ledger. So he deposits some amount in the cash ledger of old Satyam because he doesn't have any cash ledger during this period because he did not receive the GST certificate. So now friends, during this period, if he is depositing any amount in electronic cash ledger of old Satyam, agreed, he deposits. Now friends, when he after receiving the GST number of new Satyam, let's say some balance is still lying in the cash ledger of old Satyam. Who has deposited it? The Resolution Professional has deposited it. Now he wants to apply for a refund of the dues which are there in the GST, of the amount which is there in the cash ledger of old Satyam. He wants to apply for a refund and deposit that amount in the cash ledger of new Satyam. So now friends, when he applies for a refund, can the department tell that already 10 crores dues are there in old Satyam, this amount is there in the cash ledger of old Satyam, even though it is deposited by Resolution Professional, I would not give you a refund, I would adjust this amount against 10 crores. So now friends, here the provision tells you, the circular tells you, this cannot be done because this would defeat the objective of the IBC. Because Resolution Professional has deposited it, he is in charge only for the dues of new company. And moreover, during moratorium period, no recovery action can be initiated, no amount can be adjusted by the GST department. So therefore, when he applies for a refund of deposits which are there in cash ledger, who is applying it? Resolution Professional. From which GST? Old Satyam. Can GST and department, can the department adjust it against the old dues? The answer is no. Refund has to be granted to the Resolution Professional. The next part, the last part, can old registration be cancelled? Now friends, please understand, this old Satyam did not file returns for a continuous 6 tax periods. Can old GST number be cancelled by the department? Friends, please understand, during moratorium period, no legal proceedings can either be initiated or continued against the corporate debtor. Now, if the department wants to cancel the registration during the moratorium period, it is as good as initiating some legal proceedings against this corporate debtor, which is not permissible according to IBC. So even though the returns are not being filed for a continuous 6 tax periods for old Satyam, still the department cannot cancel the registration because of the overriding provisions of IBC 2016. Friends, the last question is it mandatory for the resolution professional to apply for a new registration as a distinct entity for new Satyam? The answer is, friends, it is no, it is not mandatory. I'll tell you a scenario where, let's say, this company Satyam did not pay its financial creditors. It has not got any GST liability. Please understand, Satyam Limited is a defaulter, but it is defaulting its financial creditors. As regards as operational creditors is concerned, there is no outstanding dues. There is nil GST dues. In the example what we had seen, it was 10 crores. Now let's take a scenario where the GST dues as regards as operational creditor, the GST department is concerned, there are 0 dues for the period Jan to June, and all the returns have been properly filed. GSTR 1 is being filed, GSTR 3B is being filed of old Satyam. Now, still, since financial creditors are not being fed, they are not being paid, this financial creditor approaches NCLT. NCLT appoints a resolution. Professional moratorium period is granted. Now, friends, when resolution professional is appointed, is it mandatory for him to take a new registration? The answer is no. Friends, why was this concept of new registration introduced? Because without filing returns for the preceding tax periods, returns for the subsequent tax periods cannot be filed. So therefore, there was a provision in notification 11/2020 where resolution professionals should apply for a new registration as a distinct entity of Satyam Limited. Now friends, since already the preceding tax period returns are filed, there are no dues which are pending to be discharged to the GST department. This resolution professional can very well file the returns in the old GST number itself for the subsequent tax periods. So friends, if all the returns are being filed GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, this Satyam is not a defaulter of GST dues. Still NCLT has appointed a resolution professional because Satyam Limited is a defaulter of financial creditors. Since there are no GST dues which are pending, all the returns are being filed. Now, subsequent tax periods, easily returns can be filed in the old GST number itself. There is no requirement for this resolution professional to apply for a new GST registration. I'm sure we are clear with this. So, by this friends, we conclude the discussion which we had of notification 11/2020 and with the related circular as regards as corporate insolvency read along with IBC code 2016 is concerned. Next friends, a very small change in TCS, tax collection at source. Now friends, a person who is liable to deposit TCS, he has to take registration, and under section 52 he is supposed to file GSTR 8 on a monthly basis, that is on or before 10th of the subsequent month. He is also supposed to file GSTR 9B on a yearly basis. It is the annual statement. The due date happens to be on or before 31st of December following the end of the financial year. For GSTR 8, the due date happens to be 10th of the subsequent month. Friends, both these returns, your GSTR 8 and GSTR 9B, they are filed under section 52. They are not the returns which are filed under section 39. They are filed under section 52. Now friends, if at all the government wanted to extend these due dates, if at all the government wants to extend the due dates of GSTR 8 and GSTR 9B, these due dates cannot be extended by a notification because section 52 did not have any provision where the commissioner by a notification can extend these due dates. Now friends, if at all the government wanted to extend these due dates, naturally it had to come by means of an order which had to be issued under section 172. Now friends, the amendment is section 52 has been amended to provide that the due dates of GSTR 8 and GSTR 9B can be extended by merely passing a notification by the commissioner. An order is no longer required. An order is no longer required to be passed to extend the due dates of GSTR 8 and GSTR 9B. Friends, please don't get confused. This is applicable only for TCS and not for TDS because the TDS returns are already filed under section 39 only. The TDS returns are not filed under section 51. TDS returns are filed under section 39, and 39 already had a provision that the commissioner could extend the due dates by a notification. It was the TCS returns which are filed under section 52. Section 52 did not have any such provision where the due dates can be extended by notification, where section 52 is now being amended to give effect that the commissioner may by a notification itself can extend the due dates of GSTR 8 and GSTR 9B. So it is only so much the changes which is there in section 52. Section 52 subsection 4, which talks about GSTR 8, the commissioner can pass a notification and extend the due date. Section 52 subsection 5, which speaks about an annual statement in GSTR 9B, the due date of which can also be extended by the commissioner by passing a notification, of course on the recommendations of GST Council.
Subscribe to LearnCap and hit the bell icon to get notified.